Chapter 1. Forbidden Secrets. The Lunaris Library loomed over the city like a sentinel from another time, its towering spires cutting into the evening sky. Ava sighed as she stacked a final pile of books onto her cart, the familiar smell of aged paper and dust settling into her senses. It was the end of another quiet shift, but Marisol's words earlier had lodged themselves in her mind, refusing to leave. "You've heard the rumors, right?" Marisol had whispered, her eyes darting around as if the walls themselves were listening. Strange things happening in the restricted section. Lights, sounds. Ava had laughed it off then, brushing aside her friend's conspiratorial tone. But now, alone in the quiet of the library, her curiosity burned. The restricted archives were off limits to nearly everyone, their contents shrouded in mystery and guarded by Eleanor, the formidable head archivist. As Ava pushed her cart toward the main desk, her gaze drifted, almost unconsciously, to the iron-gated doorway that led to the restricted section. The air around it seemed different, heavier somehow, as if the room beyond held its breath. Before she could look away, a shadow moved in the corner of her vision. "Ava!" She jumped, spinning to see Eleanor standing behind her, arms crossed, an expression unreadable. The older woman's eyes seemed to pierce right through her. "I was just finishing up," Ava said quickly, straightening her posture. Eleanor's gaze flicked toward the gated door and back to Ava. "Curiosity is dangerous in this place," she said, her voice low and measured. "Some knowledge is best left untouched." Ava nodded, though her heart raced. Eleanor's cryptic warnings always carried weight, but this one felt personal. As the archivist turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous room, Ava hesitated. Then, as if pulled by an invisible string, she stepped closer to the iron gate. The air grew cooler as she approached. Dust motes floated in the faint beam of moonlight filtering through the high windows. Her fingers brushed the cold iron, and for a moment she thought she heard a faint whisper, so soft it could have been the wind. She should turn back. Eleanor's words echoed in her mind, but something deeper called to her, a need to know. Slipping through the gate, which inexplicably swung open with a creak, Ava found herself in a corridor lined with towering shelves. Unlike the rest of the library, this section felt alive. The air carried a faint metallic tang, and the silence wasn't empty but full of something, an anticipation that prickled at her skin. Her eyes fell on a pedestal at the end of the aisle, illuminated by a single beam of light. Resting atop it was a book, its leather cover adorned with intricate silver glyphs that seemed to shimmer and shift as she approached. The symbol of a wolf, majestic and haunting, was embossed in the center. "What are you?" she murmured, her fingers hovering over the cover. The glyphs pulsed faintly, as if responding to her voice. A strange warmth spread through her hand, pulling her closer. The moment her fingers made contact, the whispers grew louder, coalescing into a voice she couldn't understand, but felt compelled to follow. The glyphs shifted under her touch, and before she could think to stop, the words flowed unbidden from her lips, ancient and unfamiliar. The room shuddered. A soft silver light enveloped her, and the air thickened, pressing down on her chest. She tried to pull away, but her hands wouldn't move. The book seemed to cling to her, its energy coursing through her veins like fire and ice. When the light finally faded, Ava staggered back, clutching the book to her chest. The whispers had stopped, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. But the stillness didn't last. From deep within the library, an otherworldly howl echoed, low and mournful, sending a chill down her spine. It was unlike any sound she'd ever heard, ancient and wild, filled with a longing that resonated in her very bones. Ava stumbled out of the restricted section, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She glanced back at the iron gate, now closed as if it had never been opened. "What have I done?" she whispered, the book's weight heavy in her arms as she fled into the shadows of the library. Chapter 2. Dreams and Shadows. Xander jolted awake, his breath sharp and ragged as if he had been running for hours. The room was dark,
the faint glow of moonlight slipping through the cracks in the wooden shutters of his cabin. For a moment he lay still, staring at the ceiling, trying to shake the vivid images from his mind. But the dream clung to him, stubborn and unyielding. A silver wolf, radiant and fierce, battling against a monstrous shadow that seemed to stretch endlessly across a barren field. Its growls echoed in his ears, mingling with the cries of wolves twisted into grotesque shapes. And then the eyes, the wolf's eyes, glowing with a light that pierced the darkness. They looked straight at him, pleading, accusing. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, burying his face in his hands. The dreams had been coming more frequently, each one more intense than the last. They weren't just dreams, they were warnings. He knew it deep in his bones, the same way he knew the shifting winds meant a storm was coming. Something was wrong, something bigger than anything he had faced before. A knock at the door broke the silence. Xander straightened, brushing a hand through his dark hair. "Come in," he called, his voice hoarse. The door creaked open, revealing Luca, his beta and closest confidant. Luca's lean frame was tense, his sharp features drawn tight with concern. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Xander shook his head. The dreams again. Luca's brow furrowed as he leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "You've had them for weeks now. Are they getting worse?" "Yes," Xander admitted, his voice low. "It's always the same, the silver wolf, the shadow, the darkness. And the wolves, Luca. They're not just fighting it, they're becoming it." Luca's jaw tightened. The council should hear about this. They need to know if... "No," Xander cut him off. "Not yet. They'll turn it into politics, use it as another excuse to push their agendas. I need to figure out what it means first." Luca hesitated, then nodded. "If anyone can make sense of it, it's you. But you can't shoulder this alone, Xander. Not this time." Xander met his beta's gaze, a flicker of gratitude softening his features. "I'll be fine. Just keep the pack steady. If the dreams are right, things are going to get worse before they get better." The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken fears hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Luca clapped Xander on the shoulder. "I'll keep watch tonight. Get some rest, Alpha." As Luca left, Xander stared out the window, the pale moonlight casting shadows across the room. He knew rest wouldn't come, not tonight. The dreams weren't just warnings. They were a call to action, one he couldn't ignore. Hours later, Xander stood on the cliffs overlooking his pack's territory. The wind howled around him, carrying the scents of the forest below, pine, earth, and the faint musk of his wolves. The pack slept, unaware of the storm brewing beyond their borders. Xander closed his eyes, breathing deeply, and let the memories of his dream resurface. The silver wolf's light, the shadows consuming darkness, the anguished howls of his kin. It was a prophecy, he was certain of it, and the wolf, there was something familiar about her, something that tugged at a part of him he couldn't explain. A rustling in the underbrush snapped him from his thoughts. His eyes snapped open, scanning the tree line below. A figure emerged, moving with a predatory grace. For a moment, Xander's heart leapt, thinking it might be her, the wolf from his dream. But the figure stopped short, and he recognized the familiar stance of a scout. "Alpha," the wolf said, shifting back into his human form as he approached. His face was pale, his breathing ragged. "There's something in the woods. It's not natural." Xander tensed. "Show me." The forest was alive with unease. Xander followed the scout through the dense trees, their footsteps muffled by the thick undergrowth. The air felt heavier here, the scent of decay mingling with the usual earthy tones. The scout stopped abruptly, pointing to a clearing ahead. At first glance it seemed empty. But as Xander stepped closer, he saw it, a patch of ground where the grass had blackened and withered, spreading outward like veins. The trees surrounding it were twisted, their bark split and oozing a dark, sap-like substance. The air buzzed faintly, like the hum of an unseen predator.
"What is this?" Xander murmured, crouching to inspect the ground. He touched the soil, only to pull back as a sharp chill ran up his arm. The scout's voice trembled. "It's spreading, Alpha. I've never seen anything like it." Xander rose, his expression grim. The darkness from his dreams was no longer confined to the realm of sleep. It was here, encroaching on their world. "Gather the pack," he ordered, "and send a message to the council. They need to know what's coming." As the scout hurried off, Xander remained in the clearing, staring at the corrupted ground. The silver wolf's eyes flashed in his mind again, and a sense of foreboding settled in his chest. Whatever this was, it was only the beginning. A howl broke through the silence, distant but unmistakable. Xander tilted his head, listening. It wasn't one of his wolves. It was something else, something wild and ancient. Chapter 3. The Silver Awakens. Ava sat cross-legged on the floor of her dimly lit apartment, the tome resting in her lap. Its weight felt unnatural, almost alive, as though it were watching her. The air in the room was thick, pressing down on her chest as she stared at the shifting glyphs on the cover. The silver sigil of the wolf seemed to shimmer in the candlelight, beckoning her. Her fingertips hovered over the cover, hesitant. The events at the library had left her shaken, but the pull of the tome was undeniable. She'd tried to leave it locked away in her bag, tried to ignore its presence, but the whispers had followed her. Even now they brushed the edges of her mind, a siren song she couldn't escape. Taking a deep breath, she opened the book. The glyphs inside danced across the pages, glowing faintly as if responding to her presence. Her eyes traced the symbols, and though she didn't recognize the language, the words seemed to flow into her mind as though they had always been there. "To awaken what lies within, the light must pierce the shadow," she murmured, the ancient syllables rolling off her tongue unbidden. As the last word left her lips, a sudden surge of energy coursed through her. Pain struck her like a lightning bolt, searing through her limbs and wrenching a scream from her throat. She doubled over, clutching her sides as the world around her blurred. Her body was on fire. Her bones felt as though they were shattering and reforming all at once. The candlelight flared wildly, casting frantic shadows on the walls. She could hear the pounding of her heart, impossibly loud, and beneath it, the low growl of something primal. Her hands shot to her face as a sharp, unbearable pressure built behind her eyes. Her vision swam, and for a moment everything was silver, a blinding, radiant light that consumed her entirely. And then it was over. Ava collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. Her limbs trembled uncontrollably, her muscles screaming in protest as she tried to push herself up. The room was a wreck. Furniture was overturned, her books scattered and torn. Deep claw marks marred the walls, jagged and raw. She froze, staring at her hands. They weren't hands anymore. Her fingers had elongated, tipped with sharp, glinting claws. Her nails, no, talons, gleamed faintly in the pale moonlight streaming through the window. The sight sent a chill down her spine. The whispers returned, louder this time, no longer brushing against her consciousness but demanding her attention. She could feel something within her stirring, a presence ancient and wild. It wasn't human, but it was undeniably her. The metallic taste of fear coated her tongue as her heightened senses overwhelmed her. She could hear the hum of the electricity in the walls, the faint rustle of leaves outside, the distant murmur of voices blocks away. Her vision sharpened, every detail in the room suddenly painfully vivid. "What is happening to me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Her reflection caught her eye, and she turned toward the cracked mirror propped against the far wall. What she saw made her breath catch. Her face was still hers, mostly, but her eyes had changed. They glowed faintly, a piercing silver that seemed to pulse with a light of its own. Her cheekbones were more pronounced, her features sharper, almost feral. She stumbled to her feet, her movements unsteady. The room spun, her new senses clashing with her fragile grasp on reality. Panic clawed at her chest, and she let out a choked sob, feeling the weight of what she had become. A sudden knock at the door snapped her out of her spiraling thoughts. "Ava, you in there?" Marisol's voice called from the hallway, muffled but tinged with concern. "You've been quiet all night. Everything okay?" Ava's heart raced. She couldn't let Marisol see her like this. She took a step toward the door, only to stagger back as her claws scraped against the hardwood floor with a grating sound. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she struggled to steady herself. "I'm fine," she called back, her voice cracking. "Just not feeling well. Go home. I'll call you tomorrow." There was a pause, and then Marisol replied hesitantly, "Okay, if you're sure. Just take care of yourself, Ava." Ava waited until she heard Marisol's footsteps retreating down the hall before collapsing onto her knees. Her claws dug into the floor as she tried to suppress the sobs threatening to overwhelm her. She couldn't stay here. The whispers were growing louder, the pull of the tome stronger. Whatever had been awakened within her, it wasn't going away. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Her gaze fell on the tome, still glowing faintly where it lay on the floor. Its glyphs pulsed in time with her heartbeat, as if mocking her fear. Gritting her teeth, Ava grabbed the book and shoved it into her bag. She glanced around her ruined apartment one last time, the claw marks and broken furniture a stark reminder of the creature she was becoming. Without another thought, she fled into the night, the tome's whispers guiding her toward the unknown. Chapter 4. The Fateful Meeting. The forest at dawn was a place of hushed whispers and dappled light, the rising sun casting long beams through the ancient trees. Ava's breath clouded in the crisp air as she walked deeper into the woods, clutching the tome tightly against her chest. The whispers from the book had subsided, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to envelop everything around her. Yet she felt it, a pull, an instinct, guiding her forward. Her sneakers crunched against the carpet of fallen leaves and twigs, the only sound breaking the stillness. The deeper she ventured, the more alien the forest became. The trees grew larger, their roots twisting out of the ground like ancient gnarled hands. The air smelled sharper here, filled with the earthy tang of moss and something faintly metallic. It wasn't just a forest anymore. It was a threshold to something otherworldly. The tome in her arms grew heavier with each step, its glyphs faintly pulsing beneath her fingers. Ava tightened her grip. Whatever answers it held, she would find them. She had to. A sudden rustling to her left stopped her in her tracks. She froze, her heart pounding as her eyes scanned the shadows between the trees. The forest held its breath, the stillness now oppressive. Slowly she backed away, her fingers brushing against the edge of her bag. Then he emerged. The figure stepped out of the shadows with a quiet grace that made Ava's breath catch. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his movements fluid and predatory, his piercing gaze locked onto hers, golden eyes that seemed to gleam even in the dim light. He wasn't human, not entirely. The air around him thrummed with power, and Ava instinctively took a step back. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound firm. The man regarded her silently for a moment, his expression unreadable. His dark hair fell across his forehead, framing sharp, angular features. His presence was overwhelming, like the forest itself had shaped him from its roots and shadows. "You have the tome," he said finally, his voice low and steady. It wasn't a question. Ava tightened her grip on the book. "What do you want with it?" His gaze flicked to the tome in her arms, then back to her face. "It's not what I want. It's what you've already set in motion." Her stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" He stepped closer, and though his movements were slow, they carried an unspoken authority that made her pulse quicken. Ava fought the urge to retreat. "The tome chose you," he said, "but its power comes with a cost, one you may not be ready to pay." Ava's breath hitched. The words felt like a confirmation of her deepest fears. She shook her head, her voice rising. "I didn't ask for any of this. I just want to understand what's happening to me." The man's eyes softened just barely. "Then you're already on the right path." A distant howl broke through the stillness, sharp and mournful. Ava flinched, her instincts screaming at her to run. The man tensed, his gaze snapping to the trees behind her. "They're coming," he said, his voice clipped. "If you want answers, follow me, now." Wait, who's coming? Ava's mind raced, her body frozen in place. The howl echoed again, closer this time, and it carried with it a strange, unnatural edge that made her skin crawl. "No time," he growled, stepping toward her and grabbing her arm. His touch was firm but not unkind. "Trust me, or stay here and find out for yourself." The urgency in his voice pushed her into motion. Ava let herself be pulled along, the tome pressed tightly against her chest as they plunged deeper into the forest. The trees blurred around them, the ground uneven beneath her feet. She stumbled, but the man's grip kept her steady. "What are those things?" she panted, struggling to keep up. "Corrupted wolves," he replied without looking back. "Twisted by the darkness. They'll tear you apart if they catch you." Ava's stomach churned, her fear spiking as the howls grew louder. She couldn't see them yet, but she could feel them. A malevolent presence closing in, heavy and suffocating. The man suddenly stopped, his hand tightening on her arm to steady her. "Stay close," he commanded, "and don't make a sound." They crouched behind the roots of a massive tree, its gnarled bark offering some semblance of cover. Ava's breaths came in shallow gasps as she pressed herself against the rough surface, her heart pounding in her ears. The first wolf emerged from the shadows moments later. It was massive, its fur matted and blackened as if scorched. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and its movements were jerky, unnatural. A low growl rumbled from its throat, sending a shiver down Ava's spine. The man shifted slightly, placing himself between Ava and the creature. His golden eyes narrowed, and for a moment Ava thought she saw something shimmer around him, a faint aura of light, subtle but powerful. The corrupted wolf sniffed the air, its head snapping in their direction. Ava bit back a gasp, clutching the tome tighter as her panic threatened to consume her. Before the creature could lunge, the man moved. He was a blur of motion, faster than her eyes could track. A feral snarl escaped his lips as he collided with the wolf, the impact sending a shockwave through the clearing. Ava watched in stunned silence as the fight unfolded, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The man fought with a primal ferocity, his movements fluid and devastating. The corrupted wolf was strong, but he was stronger, and within moments it lay motionless on the ground. He turned back to her, his chest heaving. "We need to keep moving. There will be more." Ava nodded, her legs trembling as she pushed herself to her feet. She followed him without a word, her fear mingling with a strange sense of awe. Whoever he was, whatever he was, he had just saved her life. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 5. Prophecy Unveiled. The clearing was bathed in moonlight, its soft glow illuminating the mossy ground and the ancient stones that stood like sentinels around the perimeter. Ava clutched the tome tightly as she and the man, he had introduced himself as Xander, stepped into the clearing. The air felt different here, charged with a quiet power that made her skin prickle. "What is this place?" Ava asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Xander glanced at her, his golden eyes reflecting the silvery light. "A sacred site. It's protected for now. The darkness can't touch this ground." Ava exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The tension in her chest eased, but only slightly. "Why did you bring me here?" "Because the tome brought you here," Xander said. He gestured to the center of the clearing, where a flat stone slab stood, its surface etched with symbols that mirrored the ones in the book. "Place it there." She hesitated, her grip tightening on the tome. "And what happens if I do?" Xander's gaze didn't waver. "We find out why it chose you." Ava's fingers trembled as she approached the stone. Every instinct told her to run, to throw the tome as far away as she could and forget any of this had ever happened. But something deeper urged her forward, a pull she couldn't resist. Slowly she set the book down, its glyphs glowing faintly as it came into contact with the stone. The clearing seemed to exhale, the air shifting as if the forest itself had been holding its breath. The symbols on the stone began to glow, their light intertwining with the glyphs on the tome. A soft hum filled the air, growing louder until it resonated deep in Ava's chest. Then the light erupted, a silvery brilliance that engulfed the clearing. Ava staggered back, shielding her eyes as the glyphs on the tome began to move, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The hum transformed into a voice, deep and resonant, speaking in a language Ava couldn't understand, but somehow felt she knew. Xander stepped beside her, his expression grave. "Listen carefully," he said. The voice shifted, its words becoming clearer, as if tuning itself to her understanding. "The silver wolf shall rise amidst the shadow, a light to pierce the veil. Bound by blood and destiny, she alone holds the key to balance. Yet the cost shall be great, for the darkness demands its due." Ava's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground. "What does it mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Xander's jaw tightened. "It means you're the silver wolf, the one the prophecy speaks of, the one meant to stop the darkness." "No," Ava said, shaking her head. "No, I can't be. I don't even know what I am anymore." Xander crouched beside her, his voice low but firm. "You don't have to understand it all right now, but the tome chose you for a reason. That power inside you, it's not just a curse. It's the only thing standing between us and the darkness." Ava looked up at him, her silver eyes reflecting the light of the glyphs. "What if I fail?" For the first time, Xander's expression softened, and a flicker of something like compassion crossed his face. "Then we all do." The light from the tome began to dim, the glyphs settling back into their original positions. The hum faded, leaving the clearing in a deep, almost reverent silence. Ava's heart pounded as she reached out to touch the tome, her fingers brushing against its cool surface. As her hand made contact, a sudden image flashed in her mind. A grove, its trees blackened and twisted, the ground pulsing with an unnatural darkness. And in the center, a figure shrouded in shadow, its presence suffocating and vast. Ava yanked her hand back, gasping. "The corrupted grove," she said, the words spilling out before she could think. Xander's eyes narrowed. "You saw it?" She nodded, her voice shaky. "It's real, it's alive, and it's spreading." Xander rose to his feet, his posture tense. "Then we don't have much time. The grove is where the darkness is strongest. It's where we have to go." Ava stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious. We barely escaped those things back there. And now you want to walk straight into the heart of it?" "If we don't," Xander said, "it will come to us. The darkness won't stop until it consumes everything." The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud. She looked back at the tome, its faint glow a reminder of the responsibility she hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. Her mind raced, fear and doubt warring with the growing realization that she couldn't turn back now. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I'll go. But you have to promise me something." Xander tilted his head, waiting. If I lose control, if I become one of those things—" She swallowed hard. "You stop me, no matter what." His gaze was steady, unflinching. "You won't lose control." "Promise me," she insisted, her voice breaking. Xander hesitated, then gave a single solemn nod. "I promise." Ava closed her eyes, gripping the tome as though it could anchor her in the storm that was her life. When she opened them again, her silver gaze was resolute. "Let's end this." Chapter 6. The Guardian's Shadow. The forest was alive with whispers. Leaves rustled in the absence of wind, and shadows danced across the underbrush, moving as if they had wills of their own. Seth stood at the edge of a ridge, cloaked in darkness, his sharp eyes tracking the movements below. Ava and Xander moved cautiously through the forest, their voices low as they discussed the dangers ahead. Seth's heart tightened as he watched them. Ava's silver aura, faint but unmistakable, pulsed in the gloom, a beacon she couldn't yet conceal. It made her a target, for the darkness, for rival alphas, for the Wolf Council, and for him. He tightened his grip on the dagger at his side, its hilt worn smooth by generations of guardians who had carried the same oath. Protect the Silver Wolf, preserve the balance, sacrifice if necessary. The last part gnawed at him, a bitter truth he had known since childhood. His life, his family's legacy, was forfeit the moment Ava's powers awakened. Yet standing here watching her laugh nervously at one of Xander's rare attempts at humor, Seth hesitated. He had studied the prophecies, lived by the rules etched into his bloodline, but seeing her now, she wasn't just the Silver Wolf. She was a young woman thrust into a role she didn't ask for, a role that would demand more than anyone should have to give. The thought made him clench his jaw. He couldn't allow himself to think of her as anything more than his charge. "They're heading straight for trouble," he murmured to himself, his voice barely audible over the forest's unnatural hum. He had scouted ahead earlier and knew what lay in their path. A pack of corrupted wolves, their minds twisted by the darkness. They wouldn't be as lucky this time. Seth turned, his decision made. He needed to step out of the shadows. Ava felt the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. She glanced over her shoulder, her instincts prickling. "Do you feel that?" she whispered to Xander. Xander nodded, his posture tense as his golden eyes scanned the trees. "We're being watched." Before either of them could react further, a figure emerged from the shadows, his movements fluid and deliberate. Ava instinctively stepped back, clutching the tome against her chest, but Xander positioned himself between her and the newcomer, his shoulders squared and his hands curling into fists. "Who are you?" Xander growled, his voice low and threatening. The man stepped into the faint moonlight, his dark hair catching the glow. His eyes were a striking shade of green, sharp and calculating. He held up his hands, palms out, in a gesture of peace. "My name is Seth," he said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "I mean you no harm." Xander didn't relax. "Then why were you following us?" Seth's gaze flicked to Ava, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. "Because she needs protecting." Ava's grip on the tome tightened. "Protecting from what?" "From everything," Seth replied, his tone heavy. "The darkness, the council, the others who will come for you. You've barely scratched the surface of what you are, and already the world is moving to claim you." Xander took a step forward, his voice a growl. "And what makes you think we need your help?" Seth met his gaze without flinching. "Because I've been preparing for this moment my entire life. My family has guarded the Silver Wolf for generations. It's my duty to protect her." Ava's breath caught, her mind racing. "Guarded me? Why? What do you know about me?" Seth's expression softened just slightly. "Enough to know that the darkness won't stop until it consumes you. Enough to know that you'll need allies who understand what you're facing." Xander's growl deepened. "You expect us to just trust you?" "No," Seth said evenly, "but whether you trust me or not doesn't change the fact that you're walking into an ambush." Xander stilled. "What ambush?" "Corrupted wolves," Seth said. "A pack of them less than a mile ahead. They've been twisted by the darkness. They're faster, stronger, and they won't hesitate to tear you apart." Ava's stomach turned. She looked at Xander, whose jaw was tight with frustration. "If he's telling the truth," Ava said cautiously, "we can't face them alone." Xander hesitated, his distrust of Seth evident in his posture, but after a moment he gave a curt nod. "Fine, but if you try anything, I'll make sure you regret it." Seth didn't flinch. Understood. The forest grew darker as they moved closer to the corrupted wolves' territory. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisted into unnatural shapes. A faint hum filled the air, a vibration that Ava felt in her bones. Every step forward heightened the tension, her senses sharpening in ways she didn't fully understand yet. Seth led the way, his movements precise and silent. Xander stayed close to Ava, his presence steadying her nerves. When they reached the edge of a clearing, Seth held up a hand, signaling them to stop. He crouched low, peering through the underbrush. Ava followed his gaze and froze. The clearing was filled with wolves, their fur matted and blackened, their eyes glowing an eerie yellow. They moved erratically, their bodies jerking as though fighting against invisible strings. The sight sent a chill down her spine. "There are too many," Xander muttered. "We can't take them all." Seth nodded. "We don't need to. We just need to draw them away long enough to get through." "And how do you propose we do that?" Xander asked. Seth's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "Leave that to me." Before either of them could protest, Seth slipped out of the shadows, his movements so swift and quiet that Ava barely registered his absence. A moment later, a sharp whistle cut through the air, drawing the corrupted wolf's attention. Seth darted into the clearing, his dagger glinting in the moonlight as he slashed at the nearest wolf. The pack erupted into chaos, howls and growls filling the air as they lunged after him. Seth moved like a shadow, leading them away from the clearing with a calculated precision that left Ava in awe. "Come on," Xander said, tugging her arm. "We have to move." Ava hesitated, her gaze lingering on Seth as he disappeared into the forest, the corrupted wolves hot on his heels. Then she turned and followed Xander, the tome pressed tightly against her chest. They ran until the sounds of the wolves faded into the distance. When they finally stopped, Ava doubled over, gasping for air. Xander's gaze scanned the forest, his body still tense and ready for a fight. "Do you think he made it?" Ava asked, her voice trembling. Xander's jaw tightened. "I don't know, but we can't wait to find out." A rustle behind them made them both whirl around, but it was Seth who emerged from the shadows, blood staining his clothes but otherwise unharmed. His expression was calm, but his eyes held a glint of exhaustion. "They're scattered," he said simply. "We're clear for now." Ava's relief was palpable. "Thank you," she said quietly. Seth nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before turning back to the path ahead. "We should keep moving. The darkness won't give us much time." And with that, they pressed on, their uneasy alliance forged in the shadow of the coming storm. Chapter 7. Political Fractures. The Wolf Council's chamber loomed before Ava like a forgotten relic from another age. The natural plateau was carved into a circular arena, its walls etched with ancient runes that pulsed faintly under the pale moonlight. Wolves in both human and shifted forms filled the space, their murmured conversations echoing against the stone. Ava followed Xander closely, her grip on the tome tight enough to turn her knuckles white. "Stay close," Xander murmured, his voice low and protective. "The council will see you as a threat. Let me handle the talking." Ava nodded, her throat dry as her eyes darted around the room. Every gaze she met seemed to bore into her, some curious, others openly hostile. This was the heart of the Wolf Realm's power, and she was an outsider who had stumbled into its midst. At the center of the chamber stood a raised stone platform where the elders sat in a semicircle. Each elder carried an aura of authority, their presence commanding respect and fear. To Ava's left, Elder Mirella, a sharp-eyed woman with streaks of silver in her hair, observed her with a mix of curiosity and calculation. On the opposite side sat Elder Rowan, his expression cold and unreadable, though his eyes glinted with distrust. "Who brings this stranger before the council?" Rowan's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and commanding, his gaze locked onto Xander. "I do," Xander said, stepping forward. "This is Ava. She is the Silver Wolf." The chamber erupted into chaos. Some voices rose in disbelief, others in anger. Ava shrank back, the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on her like a physical force. "Enough!" Mirella's voice rang out, silencing the room. She rose to her feet, her gaze sweeping across the assembled wolves. "The prophecy speaks of a silver wolf who will rise to confront the darkness. If this girl is who Xander claims, then we must hear her out." "Or control her," Rowan interjected, his voice dripping with suspicion. "If she truly possesses the power of the Silver Wolf, she is a weapon, one that should be wielded wisely." Ava's stomach churned. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. "I'm not a weapon. I didn't ask for this power, but it's mine, and I'll decide how to use it." Rowan's lips curled into a faint sneer. Bold words for someone who doesn't understand the stakes. The darkness is spreading, and every moment we waste debating gives it more ground. "Then perhaps we should focus on unity instead of control," Morella countered, her tone measured but firm. "The prophecy is clear. The Silver Wolf's power is meant to restore balance, not to serve as a tool for the Council's ambitions." The tension in the chamber thickened as the two elders locked gazes, their ideological divide evident. Ava's pulse quickened. She glanced at Xander, who stood tall and unwavering beside her, his presence a steadying force. "The darkness doesn't care about your politics," Xander said, his voice cutting through the charged silence. "It's already here, and it's coming for all of us. Ava has the power to stop it, but not if we're too busy fighting each other to act." A murmur of agreement rippled through some of the gathered wolves, though others remained skeptical. Rowan's gaze darkened. And what happens when she loses control? What happens when the power consumes her, and she becomes a threat to us all?
Ava flinched at his words, the memory of her transformation still fresh and raw. But she straightened her spine, meeting Rowan's gaze with as much resolve as she could muster.
"I won't let that happen," she said, her voice steady. "I don't know everything about this power yet, but I'll learn. And I'll fight for this realm, just like all of you." Morella nodded approvingly, but Rowan remained unconvinced. He leaned back in his chair, his expression cold. "Words are easy. Prove it." Before Ava could respond, a shadow passed over the chamber, drawing every eye upward. The air grew colder, and a faint, unnatural howl echoed in the distance. Morella's expression tightened, and even Rowan's composure slipped for a fraction of a second. "The darkness is here," Morella said grimly, "and it grows bolder by the hour." Rowan rose to his feet. "Then we have no time to waste. If the girl wants to prove herself, let her face it." Ava's breath hitched. She turned to Xander, searching his face for reassurance. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his golden eyes steady and unyielding. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. Ava swallowed hard, her grip tightening on the tome. She looked back at Rowan and the other elders, her heart pounding. "I'll do whatever it takes to stop the darkness," she said. "But this fight isn't just mine. It's all of ours." Morella stepped forward, her gaze resolute. "Then let's prepare. The darkness won't wait for us to settle our differences. If we're to stand any chance, we must stand together." Rowan said nothing, his expression unreadable. He turned and strode out of the chamber, his silence more ominous than any threat. The other elders began to disperse, their murmurs a mix of doubt and determination. As the chamber emptied, Ava let out a shaky breath. Xander's hand remained on her shoulder, grounding her. "You did well," he said. Ava managed a small nervous smile. "I hope it's enough." "It will be," Xander said firmly, "but this is just the beginning." Together they turned and left the chamber, the weight of their task pressing heavily on their shoulders. The distant howl echoed again, a chilling reminder of the battles yet to come. Chapter 8. A Mysterious Ally. The old library annex was a forgotten corner of Lunaris, tucked behind ivy-covered walls and surrounded by the hushed whispers of time. Ava slipped inside, her boots crunching against the scattered leaves that had found their way through the broken doorframe. The air was musty, thick, with the scent of aged parchment and dust. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with books and scrolls that had been untouched for decades. She moved carefully, her fingers brushing over the spines of the tomes. Many of them were marked with symbols she couldn't read, their faded titles written in a language she didn't recognize. The tome she carried pulsed faintly in her bag, as though responding to the presence of its forgotten kin. "Why did Xander send me here?" Ava muttered to herself. The instructions had been vague: find the annex, and someone would find her. But so far, the only company she had was silence. As she stepped further into the room, The faint sound of movement made her freeze. She spun, her hand instinctively reaching for the tome. The shadows near the far end of the annex shifted, and a figure emerged from the darkness. "You're braver than I expected," the man said, his voice calm and even. He stepped into the pale light filtering through a cracked window, revealing a face both sharp and enigmatic. His green eyes gleamed like emeralds, their intensity cutting through the gloom.
"Seth," Ava said, the name falling from her lips before she could stop herself.
He inclined his head slightly. "I'm honored my reputation precedes me." She tightened her grip on the tome.
"Xander warned me about you. He said you're not to be trusted."
Seth's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "I'm sure he did. Xander's loyalty is admirable, if somewhat rigid." He took a step closer, his movements measured and unthreatening. "But I'm not here to harm you, Ava. In fact, I'm here to help." "Help me how?" Ava asked, her voice wary. Seth gestured to the tome in her hands. "You've felt it, haven't you? The whispers, the pull. That book is more than just an artifact. It's alive, and it's connected to the prophecy in ways you don't yet understand, but I do." Ava's stomach churned. She had felt it, the whispers that seemed to call to her in moments of quiet, the weight of the tome like a heartbeat in her hands. "What do you know about the prophecy?" Seth's expression darkened. "I know that the silver wolf is meant to bring balance, but balance doesn't come without sacrifice. The darkness isn't just an enemy, it's a force that feeds on fear and division. If you're going to fight it, you need to understand what you're up against." Ava hesitated. There was a sincerity in his tone that she hadn't expected, but it was layered with something else, a weight he wasn't revealing. "Why should I trust you?" "Because," Seth said, his voice softening, "you don't have a choice. The Council will try to control you, Xander will try to protect you, but neither of them can prepare you for what's coming. I can." Ava stared at him, her mind racing. She wanted to believe him, to accept the guidance he was offering, but doubt gnawed at her. "What's your stake in this? Why do you care?" Seth's gaze flickered, a brief shadow crossing his face. "Because my family has carried the burden of the Guardian's oath for generations. My purpose is to protect the Silver Wolf, even if it costs me everything." Before Ava could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the entrance. She turned to see Xander stepping into the annex, his golden eyes narrowing as they landed on Seth. "What are you doing here?" Xander demanded, his voice a low growl. He positioned himself between Ava and Seth, his stance tense and protective. "Relax, Xander," Seth said smoothly. "I was just explaining a few truths to Ava, truths you've been keeping from her." "And what would you know about truth?" Xander snapped. "You've spent your life in the shadows, manipulating everyone around you."
"And yet here I am, offering the answers she needs," Seth shot back, his calm demeanor cracking slightly. "You can't shield her forever, Xander. The darkness isn't something she can run from."
"Enough," Ava's voice rang out, silencing them both. She stepped between the two men, her silver gaze sharp. "I don't need either of you to fight over me. If you have answers, then give them to me. Otherwise, stop wasting my time." Seth's expression softened, and he nodded. "Fair enough." He reached into his coat and pulled out a scroll, its edges frayed and its surface marked with the same glyphs as the tome. "This is part of the prophecy. It speaks of a choice you'll have to make, a sacrifice that will determine the fate of the realm." Ava hesitated, then took the scroll. The glyphs glowed faintly under her touch, sending a chill down her spine. She unrolled it, her heart pounding as the words began to form in her mind. "The light cannot shine without shadow. The wolf cannot survive without sacrifice. When the time comes, the heart must guide the hand, for only then will balance be restored." The scroll fell silent, its meaning sinking into Ava's thoughts. She looked up at Seth, then at Xander. Both men watched her, their expressions unreadable. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means," Seth said quietly, "you'll have to make a choice, and it won't be an easy one." The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud. Ava folded the scroll and slipped it into her bag, her mind spinning with questions and fears she couldn't yet voice. "We'll figure it out," Xander said, his voice steady. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch reassuring. "You're not alone in this." Ava nodded, though the unease in her chest didn't abate. She glanced back at Seth, who was already fading into the shadows, his presence as fleeting as the whisper of a breeze. "I hope you're right," she murmured, more to herself than to Xander. The path ahead was dark and uncertain, and the choices she would face felt impossibly heavy. But for now she had no choice but to keep moving forward. Chapter 9, Shadows Encroach. Ava jolted awake, her breath ragged and her heart pounding. The faint light of dawn crept through the cracked blinds of her temporary shelter, casting long, thin shadows across the room. Her dreams had been vivid, filled with disjointed images. Wolves consumed by shadow, forests twisting into monstrous shapes, and a voice low and insidious whispering her name. She pressed her palms to her temples, trying to push the images away. The whispers clung to her, faint but persistent, like an itch she couldn't scratch. Her body ached, her senses still raw from the transformation she'd barely controlled the night before. The sound of movement outside snapped her out of her thoughts. Ava rose unsteadily, her muscles protesting as she crossed the room to peek through the blinds. Xander and Luca stood in the clearing, their postures tense. Luca's normally easy demeanor was gone, replaced with a grim focus that made Ava's stomach tighten. She slipped outside, the cool morning air biting at her skin. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Xander turned, his golden eyes scanning her with concern. "You should rest. You barely slept." Ava shook her head. "I'm fine. What's happening?" Luca glanced at Xander, then back at her. "We've lost contact with one of the scouting parties. They were patrolling near the corrupted grove." The name sent a chill through her. She'd seen it in her visions, a place where the darkness festered and spread like a disease. "Do you think they—" "It's likely," Xander said grimly. "The darkness doesn't leave survivors." Ava's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag, where the tome rested heavily. The glyphs had been silent since her encounter with Seth, but she could feel its energy, dormant but waiting. "What can we do?" Xander's jaw tightened. "We need to know what we're dealing with. Luca and I will track their last known location. You stay here." "No," Ava said, surprising even herself with the firmness in her voice. "If the darkness is spreading, I need to see it. I need to understand what's happening." Xander opened his mouth to argue, but Luca raised a hand. "She's right. If she's going to fight this, she needs to see what we're up against." Xander's gaze flickered between them before he sighed. "Fine, but you stay close, and if anything feels off, we leave. Understood?" Ava nodded. Understood. The forest grew darker the closer they got to the grove. The air was thick, heavy with a palpable sense of wrongness. Trees twisted unnaturally, their bark blackened and cracked. The ground beneath their feet felt unstable, as though the earth itself recoiled from their presence. Ava kept her eyes on Xander's broad back, her hands trembling despite her efforts to steady them. The whispers had grown louder, their words indistinct but insistent. She clutched the tome tightly, its faint glow a comfort and a warning. "We're close," Luca said, his voice low. He crouched, inspecting a patch of disturbed earth. "They passed through here recently, but something else did too." Ava crouched beside him, her stomach churning as she saw the deep claw marks gouged into the dirt. The edges were blackened, as if burned. What could do that? "Corrupted wolves," Xander said, his tone grim, twisted by the darkness. "They're faster, stronger, and they don't stop until everything in their path is destroyed." Luca's gaze darted to the surrounding trees. "We're not alone." The words barely left his mouth before a low growl echoed through the forest. Ava's breath caught as shadows moved between the trees, their shapes distorted and unnatural. Yellow eyes gleamed in the gloom, their gaze fixed on the group. Xander stepped forward, his stance protective. "Luca, flank left. Ava, stay behind me."
The first wolf lunged, its body a blur of blackened fur and jagged teeth. Xander met it mid-leap, his fists colliding with its chest in a burst of force that sent it sprawling. Another wolf charged from the side, but Luca was there, his blade flashing as he slashed through its twisted form. Ava stumbled back, her heart pounding as the tome's glyphs flared to life. The whispers surged, their words clear for the first time. "Release the light." "What does that mean?" she gasped, clutching the book as its energy built within her. Another wolf barreled toward her, its maw wide and snarling. Ava raised the tome instinctively, and a burst of silver light erupted from its pages. The wolf recoiled, its body disintegrating into ash as the light consumed it. Xander and Luca froze, their gazes snapping to her. The remaining wolves hesitated, their movements jerky as if caught between instinct and fear.
"Ava," Xander said, his voice urgent, "whatever you just did, do it again."
The tome's glow intensified, the glyphs shifting rapidly across its surface. Ava focused, channeling the energy that pulsed through her. Another burst of light radiated outward, forcing the wolves back. They howled, their forms dissolving as the light engulfed them. When the last wolf fell, the forest was silent. Ava's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, the tome slipping from her hands. Xander was at her side in an instant, his expression a mix of concern and awe. "Are you okay?" he asked. Ava nodded weakly. "I think so. What was that?" Luca crouched beside them, his gaze on the tome. "Whatever it is, it just saved our lives." Xander helped Ava to her feet, his grip steady. "We need to get back. The council needs to know what's happening here." Ava picked up the tome, its glow fading but its weight heavier than before. She looked back at the twisted forest, the remnants of the battle etched into the ground. The darkness was spreading, but for the first time she felt a flicker of hope. Whatever power she carried, it was hers to wield, and she would use it to fight. Chapter 10. Nightfall's Omen. The tension in the pack's encampment was palpable. Wolves milled about, their movements purposeful but jittery, as if they could feel the weight of an impending storm. Ava stood at the edge of the clearing, the tome pressed against her chest. Its glyphs had been dormant since the encounter in the corrupted grove, but she could still feel its power humming faintly beneath the surface, like a heartbeat. Xander emerged from the central tent, his expression grim. Behind him trailed Luca, his arm bandaged but his posture still defiant. Ava stepped forward to meet them, her stomach twisting at the looks on their faces. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scouts just returned," Xander said. "The darkness is advancing faster than we thought. They've taken the outer territories. Packs are abandoning their lands and retreating inward." Luca scowled, his frustration clear. "And the council is still debating whether to act. Rowan's faction is using this to push for tighter control over everyone, while Morella tries to hold things together." Ava's chest tightened. "We can't wait for the council to make up their minds. If the darkness reaches the inner packs, it'll be too late." Xander nodded, his gaze steady. "I agree. That's why we need to prepare now. Luca's leading a small group to scout the edges of the corrupted grove. We need to confirm if it's where the darkness is concentrating its forces." Ava's fingers tightened around the tome. "I'm coming with you." Xander's eyes narrowed. "No, you need to stay here where it's safe." "Safe?" Ava snapped, her frustration spilling over. "Did you see what happened back there? The darkness isn't stopping, and I'm the one who has the power to fight it. Keeping me out of the way doesn't help anyone." Luca smirked faintly, his approval evident, though he quickly masked it when Xander shot him a glare. After a long moment, Xander sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Fine," he said. "But you stay close to me and you follow my orders. Understood?" Ava nodded. "Understood." They set out at dusk, the forest shrouded in an eerie stillness. The air was heavy, carrying the faint scent of decay. Ava walked between Xander and Luca, her senses on high alert. The whispers from the tome had returned, faint and fragmented, their meaning just out of reach. "You feel that?" Luca asked, his voice low.
Ava nodded. It's like the forest is holding its breath. Xander scanned the shadows, his golden eyes sharp. The darkness is close. Stay focused. They moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the thick undergrowth. As they approached the edge of the corrupted grove, the trees grew more twisted, their bark blackened and oozing a tar-like substance. The ground beneath their feet was damp, each step accompanied by a faint squelch that sent shivers down Ava's spine. Luca held up a hand, signaling them to stop. He crouched, inspecting the ground. "Tracks," he murmured. "Fresh. They're heading east." Ava peered over his shoulder, her stomach twisting as she saw the claw marks gouged into the soil. They weren't just tracks. They were signs of a struggle. "Do you think it's one of the missing scouts?" Xander's jaw tightened. "Maybe. Let's move." They followed the trail, the oppressive atmosphere growing heavier with each step. The whispers in Ava's mind grew louder, forming fragments of sentences she couldn't fully grasp. Her grip on the tome tightened as its glyphs began to glow faintly, casting a silvery light on the darkened path. The trail ended abruptly in a small clearing. In the center stood a lone figure, hunched and motionless. Ava's breath caught as the figure turned, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow. The once human features were distorted, its body twisted by the corruption. "It's one of the scouts," Luca said, his voice tinged with sorrow. "What's left of him?" The corrupted scout let out a guttural snarl, its movements jerky and unnatural. It lunged at them faster than Ava had expected. Xander moved to intercept, his fists colliding with the creature's chest, in a burst of force that sent it staggering back. "Stay behind me," Xander barked, his voice sharp. Ava barely had time to react as another corrupted wolf burst from the trees, its maw wide and snapping. Luca slashed at it with his blade, his movements precise and practiced. The creature let out a piercing howl, its body disintegrating into ash under the force of his strike. Ava's heart pounded as she focused on the tome. The whispers coalesced into a single command: "Unleash the light." She opened the book, its glyphs flaring to life. A beam of silver light erupted from its pages, engulfing the corrupted scout. The creature let out a final agonized cry before collapsing, its body crumbling into dust. The forest fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. Ava's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, the tome slipping from her hands. Xander and Luca rushed to her side, their faces etched with concern. "Are you okay?" Xander asked, his voice urgent. Ava nodded weakly. I think so. The tome, it knew what to do." Luca picked up the book, his expression both wary and impressed. "Whatever that was, it's powerful, but it's draining you. You need to be careful." Xander helped her to her feet, his grip steady. "We need to get back to the camp. The council needs to hear about this." Ava glanced back at the clearing, her gaze lingering on the spot where the corrupted scout had stood. The darkness was growing stronger, but so was the light. For the first time she felt a flicker of hope. Whatever lay ahead, she wouldn't face it alone. Chapter 11. Tangled Affections. The campfire crackled, its light casting flickering shadows on the trees surrounding the small clearing. Ava sat cross-legged beside Luca, wrapping her arms around her knees as she stared into the flames. The weight of the tome rested in her lap, its glyphs dark and silent for now. Across from her, Xander leaned back against a fallen log, his golden eyes distant, as if he were lost in thought. The evening was quiet save for the occasional rustle of leaves, but the tension in the air was palpable. The events of the day had left them all shaken. The corrupted scout, the whispers, the flashes of light that had drained Ava to the brink of exhaustion. It had been too much, and yet not enough to deter the darkness. Luca broke the silence, his voice light but tinged with concern. "You're holding up better than I expected, Ava. Most people would have cracked by now." Ava managed a small smile. "I don't know if that's a compliment or a warning." Luca chuckled, but the sound lacked its usual warmth. "It's both. Just don't forget you're human, no matter what that thing in your lap says." He nodded toward the tome. "I'm trying. Ava said softly. Her fingers traced the edges of the book's cover, its weight both comforting and suffocating. But every time I use it, it feels like I'm losing a little more of myself. "You're stronger than you think," Xander said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. His gaze locked onto hers, steady and intense. "That power doesn't define you. You define it." Ava's chest tightened. Xander always had a way of saying exactly what she needed to hear, even if she wasn't ready to believe it. She nodded, her throat too tight to respond. The sound of footsteps approaching made all three of them tense. Xander and Luca were on their feet in an instant, their movements swift and fluid. Ava scrambled to stand, clutching the tome against her chest. Seth stepped into the clearing, his presence as commanding as ever. His green eyes swept over them, lingering on Ava for a moment longer than necessary. "Relax," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I come in peace." Xander's stance didn't waver. "What are you doing here?" Seth's lips curved into a faint smirk. "Checking on your progress. You've been busy, I see." "We don't need your help," Xander growled. His tone was low and dangerous, but Ava could see the tension in his shoulders, the barely restrained anger that simmered beneath the surface. "You don't speak for all of us," Ava said, stepping forward. She met Seth's gaze, ignoring the flicker of something she couldn't name that passed between them. "What do you want?" Seth's smirk softened, his expression turning serious. "To warn you, the darkness is moving faster than even I anticipated. You'll need more than brute strength and flashes of light to stop it." Xander's hands curled into fists. "And I suppose you have all the answers?" "No," Seth said simply, "but I have experience, and knowledge you don't. Whether you like it or not, Ava needs me." Ava glanced between the two men, the tension between them crackling like the fire. Luca stepped back, his expression carefully neutral, as if he wanted no part in whatever was about to unfold. "You don't trust him," Ava said to Xander, her voice soft but firm. "I get that, but we can't afford to turn away help, not now." Xander's gaze snapped to hers, his golden eyes blazing. Help isn't worth the cost if it comes with a knife in the back. Seth sighed, his smirk returning but tinged with exhaustion. "You're as predictable as ever, Xander, always so quick to assume the worst." "And you're as manipulative as ever," Xander shot back. "I haven't forgotten what you did." Ava's heart sank. "What are you talking about?" Neither man answered her. Seth's expression hardened, while Xander's jaw tightened. The silence between them was heavy, charged with unspoken history. "Enough," Ava said, her voice rising. She stepped between them, forcing them to look at her. "I don't care what happened between you two. Right now, we have bigger problems. If we can't work together, none of us are going to survive this." Seth's gaze softened and he nodded. "She's right. For now we need to focus on the darkness. Everything else can wait." Xander didn't respond, but he didn't argue either. He turned and sat back down by the fire, his movements stiff and deliberate. Luca followed suit, his easygoing demeanor returning as he tried to lighten the mood. "Well, this is cozy," he said, flashing a grin. "Like one big dysfunctional family." Ava shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips despite the tension. She sat back down, the tome heavy in her lap, and stared into the fire. Seth remained standing, his gaze distant as he watched the flames. The silence stretched on, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of earlier. It was a tentative truce, fragile but real. For now it was enough. Chapter 12. Seth's Secret. The library annex was silent, save for the soft scrape of parchment as Ava unrolled the ancient scroll Seth had given her. Its edges were frayed, and the glyphs shimmered faintly in the dim light. Seth leaned against a nearby table, his arms crossed, and his gaze fixed on her. Xander stood in the doorway, his golden eyes sharp and untrusting as they darted between the two. "You've been withholding things from me," Ava said, breaking the silence. Her voice trembled slightly, but her silver eyes locked onto Seth's with unwavering intensity. "It's time to tell me the truth." Seth's expression didn't change,
but a flicker of something passed through his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or resignation. "You're right," he said, his tone calm but heavy. "There are things you need to know. Things I hoped you wouldn't have to hear so soon." Ava set the scroll aside, her hands trembling slightly. "Then start talking." Seth straightened, his movements slow and deliberate. "My family, the Oath Keepers, as some call us, have been bound to the Silver Wolf for generations. Our purpose is singular, to protect the one chosen by the prophecy, no matter the cost." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Ava asked, her voice sharp. "Why all the secrecy?" "Because it's not just about protection," Seth admitted, his jaw tightening. "The Guardian's oath requires more than loyalty. It demands sacrifice." The room seemed to grow colder. Ava's heart pounded as she met his gaze, the weight of his words sinking in. "Sacrifice?" she whispered. Seth nodded. "The prophecy speaks of balance, Ava. Light and shadow. The Silver Wolf's power alone isn't enough to seal the darkness. It requires the life force of a guardian to complete the ritual." "No," Ava said, shaking her head. Her voice rose, laced with anger and disbelief. "That's not fair. You can't just give up your life for this." "It's not about fairness," Seth said, his tone unwavering. "It's about duty. This has been my family's burden for centuries, Ava. It's why I'm here." Xander stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "And you thought keeping this from her was the right thing to do? You've been lying to all of us." "I didn't lie," Seth said evenly. "I withheld the truth until the time was right." "And when exactly would have been the right time?" Xander shot back, his anger barely contained. "When she's already standing in the darkness, ready to lose everything?" "Enough," Ava said, her voice cutting through the tension. She looked at Seth, her silver eyes blazing. "I don't accept this. There has to be another way. We'll find one." Seth's expression softened, but his gaze remained steady. "Ava, the prophecy is clear. This is the only way to ensure the darkness is sealed. You have to accept that." "No," she said firmly. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me." The room fell silent, the weight of their words pressing down on all of them. Ava's chest tightened as she looked between Seth and Xander, both of them so different yet so deeply connected to her fate. She felt the weight of the prophecy like a chain around her neck, pulling her down. "What happens if we fail?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then the darkness consumes everything," Seth said. "The packs, the realm, even the light. There won't be anything left." Ava's hands clenched into fists. She looked at Xander, searching his face for reassurance. He met her gaze, his expression hard but not unkind. "We won't fail," Xander said, his voice steady. "We'll find another way, together." Seth's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't argue. Instead, he turned and picked up the scroll, handing it to Ava. "The answers you're looking for might be in here," he said, "but I can't promise they'll change anything." Ava took the scroll, her resolve hardening. "Then we'll make our own answers." Later, as the three of them left the annex, the tension still lingered in the air. Ava walked between Xander and Seth, the scroll and tome weighing heavily in her arms. The stars above offered little comfort, their light dimmed by the encroaching darkness. "Thank you," she said quietly, glancing at Seth, "for telling me the truth, even if I hate it." Seth inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "You deserve to know, but it doesn't change my oath, Ava. When the time comes, I'll do what needs to be done." "We'll see about that," Xander muttered, his tone cold but protective. Ava said nothing, her mind racing as she stared ahead into the dark forest. The path before her was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She wouldn't let anyone else bear the burden of her destiny, not if she could help it. Chapter 13. Trials of Trust. The forest was unnervingly quiet as Ava, Xander and Seth made their way through the dense underbrush. The usual sounds of rustling leaves and distant wildlife had been replaced by an oppressive stillness that pressed against Ava's senses. Every step felt heavier, every breath more labored. The tome in her bag pulsed faintly,
a rhythmic hum that seemed to sync with her own heartbeat. Luca had gone ahead to scout the trail, his presence always a steady reassurance, but Ava couldn't shake the unease crawling up her spine. The silence felt wrong, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. "We're being watched," Xander said, his voice low but steady. His golden eyes scanned the trees, his stance tense and ready. Ava tightened her grip on the strap of her bag. "By what?" "Not what," Seth said, his green eyes narrowing as he stepped closer to her side. "Who?" Before Ava could respond, a howl split the air, sharp and haunting. It echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of rustling leaves and snapping branches. Xander growled under his breath, his fists clenching as he moved to position himself in front of Ava. "It's them," he said, his voice dark. "A rival pack." The words had barely left his mouth when the first wolf lunged from the shadows. It was massive, its fur dark and bristling, its yellow eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Xander met the creature mid-leap, slamming it to the ground with a force that shook the earth. More wolves emerged from the forest, their forms distorted, their movements erratic. Ava's breath caught in her throat as she realized these weren't just rivals. They were corrupted, their bodies twisted by the darkness. "Stay close to me," Xander shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Seth moved with a fluid grace, his dagger flashing in the dim light as he fought off another wolf. Ava stumbled back, clutching the tome as its glyphs began to glow, their light pulsing in time with the battle. "Use it, Ava," Seth called out, his voice sharp and commanding. "The light, it's the only thing that can stop them." Ava fumbled with the tome, her hands trembling as she flipped it open. The glyphs flared to life, their brilliance illuminating the clearing. The whispers returned, louder and clearer than ever before, guiding her as she focused on the page before her. "Unleash the light," she murmured, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. A beam of silver light erupted from the tome, sweeping across the clearing. The corrupted wolves howled in pain as the light consumed them, their forms disintegrating into ash. Ava staggered, the energy leaving her drained, but the clearing was silent once more. Xander approached her, his expression a mix of concern and awe. "You did it," he said, his voice softer now. "You saved us." Ava shook her head, her legs trembling as she tried to steady herself. I couldn't have done it without you." Seth sheathed his dagger, his gaze lingering on Ava. "You're stronger than you realize," he said, his voice low, "but this is only the beginning." Later, as they regrouped, Luca returned, his face pale and his breathing ragged. "There's more," he said, his voice urgent. "The rival pack wasn't acting on its own. They're being controlled by something, or someone." Xander's jaw tightened. "The darkness." Luca nodded. "It's spreading faster than we thought. If we don't act soon, it won't just be the outer territories. It'll reach the council and the heart of the realm." Ava's heart sank. She looked at Xander and Seth, both of them worn but determined. The weight of the prophecy pressed heavily on her shoulders, but she knew they couldn't stop now. "Then we don't have a choice," Ava said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "We have to stop it no matter what it takes." Xander placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch reassuring. "We're with you, every step of the way." Seth's gaze met hers, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. "Together," he said, his tone firm. The group moved forward, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced. But the path ahead was darker than ever, and Ava couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Chapter 14, Power Unleashed. The forest erupted into chaos. Ava stood in the middle of the clearing, the tome glowing hot in her hands as the darkness surged around them. Twisted wolves, their eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light, circled the group. Their snarls were guttural and unnatural, echoing with a faint, malevolent whisper. Xander was the first to react, charging toward the nearest wolf with a roar that seemed to shake the trees. His fists connected with the creature's chest, sending it sprawling to the ground. Luca flanked him, his blade flashing as he slashed through another wolf. Seth stood close to Ava, his dagger spinning with deadly precision as he cut down anything that got too close.
but the creatures kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. Ava's breaths came in short, shallow gasps as the tome pulsed in her hands, the glyphs shifting rapidly across its surface.
"Ava!" Xander's voice cut through the noise. "We need that light now."
Ava's fingers tightened around the tome. The whispers from its pages grew louder, more insistent, forming words she didn't fully understand but felt compelled to obey.
"Release the silver wolf."
The command echoed in her mind, sending a shiver down her spine. She glanced at Seth, his green eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. "Do it," he said firmly. "You're stronger than this." Ava closed her eyes, centering herself despite the chaos. She focused on the tome, letting its energy flow through her. The air around her grew heavy, charged with a silvery light that radiated from the book. The glyphs glowed brighter, their patterns searing themselves into her mind.
When she opened her eyes, the light exploded outward.
A blinding wave of energy surged from the tome, washing over the clearing. The corrupted wolves recoiled, their bodies disintegrating into ash as the light consumed them. The malevolent whispers faded, replaced by a deafening silence.
Ava staggered, her legs buckling as the tome's glow dimmed. Seth caught her before she fell, his grip steady as he guided her to the ground. "Easy," he said softly. "You did it." Xander and Luca approached, their expressions a mix of relief and awe. The clearing was empty now, the ground littered with ash and the faint scent of burned earth. "That was—" Xander began, his voice trailing off. He crouched beside Ava, his golden eyes searching hers. "Are you okay?"
Ava nodded weakly. "I think so." She looked down at the tome, its glyphs now dark and still. "But it's draining. Every time I use it, it feels like it's taking a part of me."
"We'll figure it out," Luca said, his voice lighter, trying to lift the mood. "But that was incredible, Ava. You saved us."
"For now," Seth said, his tone more somber. He released Ava and stood, scanning the tree line. "The darkness won't stop here. This was just a fraction of its power." Xander's jaw tightened. "Then we keep moving. We'll find where it's strongest and end this."
Ava rose to her feet, her legs still shaky but her resolve firm. She met Xander's gaze, her silver eyes reflecting the faint light still lingering in the air. "We can't do this alone. We need the Council's help."
Xander's expression darkened. "The Council's too divided. Rowan will never agree to help without trying to control you."
"Then we convince Mirella," Ava said. "She believes in the prophecy. She'll listen." "If we can reach her before Rowan does," Seth added. Ava squared her shoulders, the weight of the tome heavy but manageable now. "We don't have a choice. If the darkness is growing stronger, we need every ally we can find."
Xander hesitated, then nodded. "All right. We head to the Council. But we stay on guard. If Rowan tries anything—" "We'll be ready," Ava said, her voice steady. She looked at the ashes scattered across the clearing, a reminder of what they were up against. The light had saved them this time, but she knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. As they prepared to move, the faint hum of the tome returned, a reminder that her journey was far from over. The darkness was still out there, and Ava would need every ounce of strength and every ally to face what was to come.
Chapter 15. Ancestral Ties.
The forest grew quieter as they moved deeper into its heart, the air heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. Ava trailed behind Xander and Seth, her gaze drawn to the tome in her hands. Its glyphs pulsed faintly, their light casting soft patterns on the ground as if urging her forward. Each step felt like a step closer to something monumental, though the weight of uncertainty pressed heavily on her shoulders. They stopped at a small clearing where a jagged rock jutted from the earth like a blade. Seth turned to Ava, his green eyes sharp but not unkind. "This is it," he said, "the place where your lineage began."
Ava looked around, her heart quickening. The clearing felt different, as though the very air here vibrated with ancient power. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
Seth gestured to the rock. "The Silver Den. This isn't just any sacred site. It's where the first silver wolf made the pact to protect the balance of light and darkness." Ava stepped closer to the stone, her fingers brushing against its cold, rough surface. The tome grew warmer in her hands, its glyphs glowing brighter. Visions flashed in her mind, a wolf cloaked in silver light standing against a tide of shadows, its eyes filled with fierce determination. The image shifted to a human figure, their hand outstretched as they sealed the pact with ancient glowing runes.
"This is where it all started," she murmured, her voice trembling. "The prophecy, it's tied to this place."
Xander approached her, his golden eyes scanning the rock. "The Silver Den has always been a place of power, but it's also dangerous. The darkness knows what this place means. It will try to destroy it if it hasn't already." Seth nodded. "That's why we need to act quickly. The answers we seek are here, but they're not without cost."
Ava turned to him, her brow furrowing. "What kind of cost?" Seth hesitated, his gaze flickering to the tome. "The Silver Den is connected to your bloodline, Ava. To fully unlock its secrets, you'll need to open yourself to it, completely. That means facing what it shows you, no matter how painful or frightening." Xander's jaw tightened. "Is that really necessary? She's been through enough already." "The darkness won't wait for her to be ready," Seth replied, his tone firm but not harsh. "This is the only way to understand what she's truly capable of." Ava swallowed hard, her fingers curling around the tome. The visions had already begun to stir something deep within her, a connection to a legacy she hadn't asked for but couldn't deny. She looked at Xander, his protective gaze grounding her, then back at Seth, whose resolve mirrored her own.
"I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. "Whatever it takes, I'll face it."
The ritual began as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the clearing in hues of orange and gold. Ava stood at the base of the stone, the tome open in her hands. Seth guided her through the ancient incantations, his voice low and melodic as he chanted alongside her. The air grew colder, and the glyphs on the tome flared to life, their light intertwining with the runes carved into the rock. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the clearing, carrying with it whispers that sent shivers down Ava's spine. She closed her eyes, focusing on the words flowing from her lips. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and when she opened her eyes the world had shifted. The clearing was gone. In its place stood an ethereal forest, bathed in silver light. Wolves moved silently among the trees, their forms ghostly but powerful. In the center of it all stood a woman cloaked in silver, her presence both commanding and serene. "Ava," the woman said, her voice resonating like a melody, "you have come far, but the journey ahead is longer still. Do you understand the weight of your role?" Ava swallowed, her throat dry. I think so, but I don't know if I'm strong enough to carry it." The woman's gaze softened. "Strength is not born. It is forged. The light within you is powerful, but it must be balanced with your humanity. Only then can you stand against the darkness." The wolves around them howled in unison, their voices blending into a single haunting chorus. The woman stepped closer, placing a hand on Ava's shoulder. "You are not alone in this. Remember that." The vision began to fade, the silver light dimming as the whispers grew quieter. When Ava opened her eyes, she was back in the clearing, the tome's glow fading to a faint shimmer. Seth and Xander were at her side in an instant. Xander's hands steadied her as she swayed, exhaustion washing over her like a tide. "What happened?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Ava looked at him, then at Seth, her expression resolute despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "I saw them, the ones who came before me. They showed me what I have to do." Seth's gaze was steady. "And are you ready?" Ava straightened, the weight of her destiny no longer a burden but a purpose. "I don't have a choice. I have to be." Chapter 16, Gathering Storm. The winds carried an unnatural chill as Ava and her companions returned to the camp. The sun had barely risen, but the tension in the air made it feel as though night had never ended. Wolves moved with purpose, their faces grim as they sharpened weapons and whispered in hushed tones. The news from the scouts had reached them.
The darkness wasn't just spreading, it was organizing. Xander strode ahead, his golden eyes scanning the perimeter. Luca walked beside him, his usual smirk replaced by a hardened expression. Seth trailed behind them, his movements quiet and deliberate. Ava clutched the tome tightly against her chest, its faint hum a constant reminder of the power she carried and the battles to come. "They're scared," Ava said softly, her gaze following a pair of young wolves who glanced nervously toward the forest. "They should be," Seth replied, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Fear keeps them vigilant. Complacency gets wolves killed." Xander turned to them, his voice sharp. "Fear also breeds chaos. We need to keep the pack focused. If we fall apart now, the darkness wins without a fight."
Ava nodded, though a knot of anxiety tightened in her chest. The weight of the prophecy, the relentless pull of the tome, and the looming battle all pressed down on her, threatening to break her resolve. But she couldn't afford to falter now, not when so many were counting on her.
They gathered in the central clearing, where Elder Mirella stood waiting. The older wolf's silver-streaked hair caught the dim light as she addressed the group, her voice steady and commanding.
"The darkness is not a mindless force," Mirella said, her piercing gaze sweeping over the gathered wolves. "It adapts, it manipulates, and it preys on division. If we are to stand against it, we must be united."
Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ava stood at the edge of the clearing, flanked by Xander and Seth. She could feel the tension building, the doubts simmering just below the surface. Elder Rowan stepped forward, his expression cold and calculating. "Unity is a fine ideal, but we can't rely on hope alone. The Silver Wolf may be our best chance, but she's untested. Are we willing to risk everything on her?" The words stung, but Ava forced herself to stand tall. Before she could speak, Xander stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority. "Ava has proven herself time and time again," he said. "She's fought the darkness and lived. She's stronger than any of us expected, and she's willing to risk everything for this realm. Can any of you say the same?" The crowd fell silent, and Rowan's eyes narrowed. Mirella stepped in, her tone firm but diplomatic. "Enough, Rowan. Doubt serves no one here. If you have a better plan, let us hear it." Rowan said nothing, his lips pressing into a thin line. Ava took a deep breath and stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I know what's at stake," she said. "I know I haven't earned all of your trust yet, but I'm not doing this alone. Xander, Seth, Luca, all of you have fought beside me. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I do know this. If we don't stand together, we've already lost." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Mirella nodded approvingly. Rowan said nothing, but his expression remained tight with skepticism. As night fell, preparations for the coming battle intensified. Ava stood with Seth at the edge of the camp, watching as wolves armed themselves and reinforced their defenses. "They believe in you," Seth said, his voice quiet. Ava glanced at him, her silver eyes reflecting the faint light of the torches. "Do you?" Seth hesitated, then nodded. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." The answer was simple, but it steadied her more than she expected. She turned her gaze back to the camp, her resolve hardening. "Then let's make sure their belief isn't misplaced." Later that night, a scout returned, bloodied and barely able to stand. He collapsed in the clearing, and Xander rushed to his side. "What happened?" The scout's voice was weak but urgent. "The darkness. It's coming. They're massing near the sacred site. Hundreds of them, more than I've ever seen." The crowd erupted into chaos, fear spreading like wildfire. Mirella called for order, but her voice struggled to cut through the panic. Ava stepped forward, her voice rising above the din. "Enough!" The wolves stilled, their eyes turning to her. She took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. "This is what we've prepared for. We've faced the darkness before, and we've survived. We will survive again, but only if we stand together." Her words seemed to steady the pack, the chaos giving way to determination. Xander rose, his hand resting on the scout's shoulder as he addressed the group. "We move at dawn," he said. "We'll meet them at the sacred site and end this before it spreads any further."
Ava glanced at the tome in her hands, its glyphs glowing faintly. The whispers were quiet now, but she could feel the power building within it, waiting for the moment it would be needed most. She met Xander's gaze, her own filled with quiet determination. "We'll be ready," she said. As the camp prepared for the coming battle, Ava stood at the edge of the clearing, the wind carrying the faint scent of ash and shadow. The storm was coming, and she could feel it in her very bones, but for the first time she didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. Chapter 17. Tensions and Alliances. The sacred clearing was bathed in the cold light of the full moon, casting long shadows across the rune-etched stones. Ava stood at the center, her silver eyes scanning the gathered wolves. Alphas from rival packs, elders from the council, and warriors from scattered territories had all come, their faces a mix of wariness and resolve. The air was thick with unspoken doubts, the tension a palpable weight pressing down on the assembly. Xander stood to Ava's right, his golden eyes sharp as they roved over the crowd. Luca flanked her other side, his usual smirk replaced by a grim determination. Seth lingered in the shadows, his presence a quiet reassurance amid the unease. Elder Morella stepped forward, her silver-streaked hair catching the moonlight. She raised her hand for silence, her voice steady as she addressed the gathering. "You all know why we are here. The darkness has spread beyond the borders of our territories. It is no longer just a threat. It is an inevitability. If we do not act together, we will all fall." A murmur rippled through the crowd, doubt and fear evident in the wolves' expressions. Elder Rowan stepped forward, his face shadowed by suspicion. "And we are to put our faith in the Silver Wolf?" he asked, his voice sharp. "A girl with untested power carrying a relic none of us understand. Are we so desperate?" Ava's fists tightened at her sides, but she held her ground. Before she could respond, Xander's voice cut through the murmurs. "She has fought the darkness and survived. She's wielded the power of the tome to save lives. What more proof do you need?" Rowan's gaze flicked to Xander, his lips curling into a sneer. "Proof? How about a guarantee she won't lose control and turn that power against us?" Ava stepped forward, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath her skin. "I can't promise perfection," she said, "but I can promise that I will fight with everything I have to stop the darkness. If any of you have a better plan, I'm listening." The clearing fell silent. Rowan's gaze lingered on her for a moment before he stepped back, his expression unreadable. Mirella nodded, her approval evident. "Then it is decided. We fight together, or we fall alone." The hours that followed were a flurry of preparation. Ava found herself at the center of it all, the tome in her hands as she worked with Mirella and the other elders to decipher its glyphs. Each page seemed to reveal more of the prophecy, its words both enlightening and cryptic. Seth approached her as she studied, his presence a steady calm amid the chaos. "You handled Rowan well," he said, his tone low. Ava glanced up at him, her lips curving into a faint smile. "I'm not sure I handled him at all. He's still looking for a reason to turn on me." "He's scared," Seth said simply. "Fear makes people dangerous, but it also makes them predictable. Use that to your advantage." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'll keep that in mind." As dawn approached, the alphas and elders gathered around the sacred stones to finalize their plans. The scouts' warning had been clear. The darkness was massing near the heart of the sacred site, preparing for an all-out assault. They had little time to waste. Xander stepped forward, his voice steady and commanding. "We'll divide into 3 groups. Mirella and the elders will lead the first, defending the council and our healers. The second group will flank the darkness's forces, led by Luca and myself. Ava and Seth will lead the third, striking directly at the heart of the corruption." Ava's stomach tightened, but she nodded. She met Xander's gaze, finding reassurance in his steady confidence. "We'll do whatever it takes," she said. "I know you will," Xander replied. He hesitated, then added, "Just be careful." She nodded again, the weight of his words settling over her like a protective shield. As the wolves prepared to move, Mirella approached Ava, her expression serious.
The tome. It's more than a weapon. It's a guide. Trust it, but don't let it consume you.
I'll do my best, Ava said, her voice quiet but resolute. Morella placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare softness in her gaze. We're counting on you, Ava. All of us.
Ava nodded, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She turned to Seth, who stood waiting at the edge of the clearing. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," she replied, though the knot in her stomach told a different story. Together they moved into the shadows, the weight of the prophecy and the hopes of the realm resting on their shoulders. Chapter 18 Preparations.
The camp was alive with movement as dawn broke over the forest. Wolves shifted between their human and animal forms, carrying supplies, sharpening weapons, and whispering quiet prayers to the moon. Ava stood near the edge of the camp, the tome in her hands glowing faintly in the early light. Its glyphs pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to echo the energy of the gathering forces around her. Xander approached, his golden eyes scanning the activity with a protective intensity. The scouts have reported back. The darkness is massing near the Silver Den, just as we feared. It'll be an all-out assault. Ava nodded, her grip on the tome tightening.
"We're ready," she said, though her voice betrayed the nervous energy buzzing through her. "At least, we have to be."
Xander placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding. "We'll face it together. Remember that." As the day progressed, Ava worked with Elder Morella and Seth to finalize their strategy. The tome had revealed more of its secrets overnight, its glyphs shifting to show fragments of ancient battles and rituals. Ava struggled to interpret their meaning, but Morella's sharp mind and Seth's knowledge of the Guardian's oath filled in the gaps. "The light of the silver wolf must focus the ritual," Morella explained, tracing the runes etched into the tome's pages. "It will act as a beacon to repel the darkness, but the ritual requires more than power. It demands balance." "Balance between what?" Ava asked, her brow furrowed. Seth's gaze was steady. "Between strength and sacrifice, between light and shadow. The darkness isn't just an enemy. It's part of the realm's cycle. To destroy it completely would upset that balance." Ava's heart sank. "So we're not just fighting it. We're trying to contain it." Morella nodded. "The Silver Wolf's power can seal the darkness, but only temporarily. That's why the Guardian's oath exists, to ensure the balance is maintained." Ava looked at Seth, her stomach churning. His expression was calm, but she saw the weight of the prophecy in his eyes, the knowledge of what might be required. As night fell, the camp gathered in the clearing for one final meeting. The wolves formed a loose circle around Ava, Xander, Morella, and Seth. Lucas stood at the edge of the group, his usual humor replaced by a rare seriousness. Xander stepped forward, his voice strong and steady. "You all know what's at stake. The darkness isn't just a threat to one pack or one territory. It's a threat to all of us. If we don't stand together, we won't stand at all." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Morella stepped forward next, her silver-streaked hair catching the torchlight. "We'll divide into 3 groups. The first will hold the line at the forest's edge, protecting our rear and tending to the wounded. The second will flank the darkness, drawing its forces away from the den. The third group, led by Ava, will take the fight directly to the heart of the corruption." Ava's breath caught, but she nodded. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but she knew she couldn't shy away from it. She looked at the gathered wolves, their faces a mix of determination and fear. "I know I'm asking a lot of all of you," she said, her voice carrying across the clearing. "But this isn't just my fight. It's ours. I don't know what's waiting for us out there, but I know we're stronger together. Whatever happens, we face it as one." The wolves howled in unison, a sound that sent a shiver down Ava's spine. It was a cry of unity, of defiance, of hope. For the first time, she felt a flicker of confidence that they might just stand a chance. As the wolves prepared for battle, Ava stood alone at the edge of the camp, the tome cradled in her arms. The glyphs glowed softly, their light casting faint patterns on her face. She closed her eyes, letting the whispers guide her as she focused on the power within. A vision took shape in her mind, a wolf cloaked in silver light, standing against a tide of shadows. Around it were others, a pack of wolves, their strength united with its power. Together they pushed back the darkness, their light cutting through the void like a blade. When she opened her eyes, she found Seth standing beside her. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice quiet. "A chance," Ava said, her voice steady. "But only if we trust each other, only if we fight together." Seth nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Then let's make it count." Chapter 19. The Darkness Unleashed. The forest was unnaturally still, its usual symphony of rustling leaves and distant animal calls replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Ava stood at the front of the gathered wolves, the tome clutched tightly in her hands. Its glyphs pulsed faintly, casting an eerie silver glow that illuminated the grim faces around her. Xander, Seth, and Luca flanked her, their postures tense as they scanned the darkened horizon. "They're close," Xander said, his golden eyes narrowing. The muscles in his jaw clenched as he turned to the wolves behind him. "Hold the line. We don't break until I say so." A chorus of growls and murmured affirmations rippled through the crowd. The air was thick with anticipation, every breath charged with the promise of battle. Ava's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to focus. The tome in her hands vibrated slightly, its whispers faint but insistent. "They're waiting for us to make the first move," Seth murmured, his voice low and calm. He stood just behind Ava, his dagger gleaming faintly in the silver light. "They want us to falter." "Then we won't give them the chance," Ava replied. She looked at the wolves, her voice steady despite the fear tightening in her chest. "We stand together. No matter what comes, we fight for each other, for the realm." A low growl echoed from the tree line, a sound so deep and guttural it seemed to shake the ground beneath their feet. The shadows between the trees shifted, and Ava's breath caught as the first of the darkness's creatures emerged. Wolves twisted beyond recognition, their fur matted and blackened, their eyes glowing with an unnatural yellow light. And then, behind them, it came. The darkness itself spilled into the clearing like a living thing, a writhing mass of shadows that seemed to suck the light from the air. Its presence was suffocating, a heavy, malevolent force that pressed down on Ava and the wolves around her. She could feel its hunger, its desire to consume everything in its path. "Steady!" Xander barked, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "Hold your ground!" The first wave hit hard. The corrupted wolves lunged toward the line, their movements erratic but devastatingly fast. Xander and Luca met them head-on, their strikes precise and unyielding. Seth stayed close to Ava, his blade a blur as he cut down any creature that got too close. Ava focused on the tome, its glyphs flaring to life as she opened it. The whispers grew louder, their words forming a chant that spilled from her lips unbidden. Silver light erupted from the book, forming a barrier that held back the advancing shadows. "Keep going, Ava," Seth shouted, his voice strained as he fought off another corrupted wolf. "We need that light." She gritted her teeth, pouring everything she had into the tome. The barrier held, but she could feel the strain, the pull of the darkness pressing against her mind. Her vision blurred, the edges of her consciousness flickering like a guttering flame. A sudden roar drew her attention, and she turned to see Xander locked in combat with a massive shadow beast. It towered over him, its form shifting and unstable, its eyes glowing with a cruel intelligence. Xander's strike seemed to barely faze it, and Ava's heart lurched as it swiped at him with claws as long as daggers. "Xander!" she cried, her voice raw. He dodged the blow, but barely. His gaze flicked to her, determination blazing in his eyes. "Focus, Ava. We need that light." She turned back to the tome, her hands trembling as she poured more of her energy into it. The silver light grew brighter, pushing back the darkness inch by inch. She could feel it weakening, its hold on the clearing faltering. But then the whispers changed. The tome's glyphs shifted, their light dimming as a new message formed in her mind. The Guardian's vow must be fulfilled. Ava's blood ran cold. She looked up at Seth, who was watching her with an intensity that made her chest ache. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of what she already knew.
"No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "There has to be another way."
"Ava," Seth said, his voice calm but resolute, "this is the way. It's always been the way." Before she could respond, the shadow beast roared again, its attention shifting to her. It surged forward, its massive form barreling through the silver light as if it were nothing. Ava's heart stopped as it closed the distance, its claws reaching for her.
Seth moved faster than she thought possible. He stepped between her and the beast, his dagger flashing as he plunged it into the creature's chest. The beast howled, its form unraveling into a torrent of shadows that dissipated into the air.
But Seth didn't move. He dropped to his knees, the light around him dimming as the darkness seeped into his form. Ava caught him before he fell, her hands trembling as she cradled him against her. "Seth, no," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You can't." He smiled faintly, his green eyes softening as he looked at her. "You'll finish this," he said, his voice barely audible. "You're stronger than you know." The light from the tome surged one last time, consuming the clearing in a radiant silver glow. When it faded, the darkness was gone, its creatures reduced to ash. The forest was silent once more, but the weight of what they had lost hung heavy in the air. Ava knelt beside Seth's still form, her heart shattering as she whispered, "I'll finish it. I promise." Chapter 20. Unity at a Cost. The clearing felt hollow in the aftermath of the battle. Ash and shadows lingered in the air, a faint reminder of the darkness that had threatened to consume them all. Ava knelt beside Seth's still form, her fingers trembling as she traced the faint glow of the glyphs etched into the tome. Around her the wolves stood in silence, their eyes filled with grief and exhaustion. Xander stepped forward, his golden eyes locking onto Ava's. He crouched beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Ava," he said softly, "we need to move. The darkness may be gone, but we're not safe here." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Carefully she placed the tome into her bag and rose to her feet. Her gaze lingered on Seth's face, peaceful in death, as if the weight of his oath had finally been lifted. "We'll honor him," Xander said, his voice steady but heavy with sorrow. "But for now, we finish what he started." The pack regrouped at the edge of the forest, the sacred site's energy still pulsing faintly in the background. Elder Mirella stepped forward, her silver-streaked hair catching the dim light of the rising moon. She addressed the wolves, her voice clear and commanding. "Seth's sacrifice has given us a chance," she said, "but the fight is not over. The darkness has been pushed back, but its roots remain. The silver wolf," her gaze shifted to Ava, "must complete the ritual to seal it away." Murmurs rippled through the gathered wolves. Some nodded, their expressions resolute, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Ava stepped forward, the tome in her hands glowing faintly once more. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. "I'll finish the ritual, but I can't do it alone. I need all of you." The wolves quieted, their eyes fixed on her. For a moment doubt flickered in her mind, but then Xander stepped beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "You're not alone," he said, his voice firm. "We're with you." Luca joined them, his usual smirk replaced with a somber determination. "If we're going down, let's make it worth it." Slowly the wolves began to step forward, their howls filling the night air with a unified resolve. Ava's chest tightened, not with fear, but with hope. For the first time, she felt the weight of her destiny shared by those around her. The ritual began as the moon reached its zenith. Ava stood in the center of the clearing, the tome open before her. Mirella and the elders formed a protective circle around her, their chants harmonizing with the whispers of the book. Xander, Luca, and the other wolves stood at the perimeter, their eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of an attack. Ava's hands glowed as she traced the glyphs in the tome, her voice rising with each word of the incantation. The energy in the clearing shifted, a powerful current of light and shadow swirling together, pulling at the edges of her consciousness. She could feel the darkness resisting, fighting against the light that sought to contain it. "Focus," Morella said, her voice sharp but supportive. "You're almost there." Ava's vision blurred as the power surged through her. The whispers grew louder, drowning out the chants around her. Her body trembled, every muscle straining to hold the balance between light and shadow. Then she felt it. The darkness surged one last time, a desperate attempt to break free. Ava cried out, the energy overwhelming her, but she held firm. The tome's light flared, blinding in its intensity, as the final glyph locked into place. The clearing was consumed by a brilliant silver glow, the energy rippling outward like a shock wave. When the light faded, the darkness was gone. Ava collapsed to her knees, the tome falling silent in her hands. Xander was at her side in an instant, his arm steadying her as she fought to catch her breath. "It's done," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "The darkness. It's sealed." Morella approached, her expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "The realm is safe. For now." Ava's gaze fell to the tome, its glyphs dark and still. She thought of Seth, of his sacrifice, and the promise she had made. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she wiped it away, her resolve hardening. "We're not done," she said. "The darkness may be sealed, but its remnants are still out there. We have to stay vigilant." Xander nodded, his golden eyes meeting hers. "Then we'll face whatever comes. Together." As the wolves began to disperse, their spirits lifted by their victory, Ava stood at the edge of the clearing, the weight of her destiny settling over her once more. The realm was safe, but the cost had been high. And she knew the fight was far from over. Chapter 21. The Final Stand. The night was unnaturally quiet as Ava and the wolves approached the heart of the corrupted forest. The air felt heavier with each step, thick with the scent of decay and something more insidious, a primal, almost living malevolence that seemed to watch their every move. The ground beneath their feet pulsed faintly, as though the forest itself was alive, and not in a way that welcomed them. Xander walked at Ava's side, his golden eyes scanning the shadows. Seth's absence hung heavy over the group, a silence that none of them could fill. Luca brought up the rear, his movements tense but deliberate. The rest of the pack followed in a tight formation, their faces grim but resolute. Ava clutched the tome to her chest, its glyphs faintly glowing, as if responding to the encroaching darkness. The whispers had grown quieter since the ritual, but the book's hum was a constant presence, a reminder of the power she carried, and the responsibility that came with it. "We're close," Xander said, his voice low. "You can feel it, can't you?" Ava nodded. "It's stronger here, the darkness, it's waiting for us." Luca snorted. "Let it wait. We'll make sure it regrets that decision." Despite herself, Ava smiled faintly. Luca's confidence, though sometimes misplaced, had a way of lightening even the darkest moments. But the smile faded as they stepped into a massive clearing. The source of the corruption loomed before them. A great black mass writhed at the center of the clearing, its form shifting and pulsing as though it were breathing. Tendrils of shadow stretched out from it, snaking across the ground and wrapping around the trees, their bark splintered and oozing a dark, viscous liquid. The air was colder here, each breath burning in Ava's lungs. "The heart of the darkness," Morella said, stepping up beside Ava. Her voice was steady, but her silver-streaked hair betrayed her tension. "This is where it all ends." The wolves fanned out, their movements cautious but deliberate. Xander turned to Ava, his expression resolute. "You'll have to get close," he said. "The tome's light will only reach the heart if you're right in front of it." "And what happens when it fights back?" Ava asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm. Xander placed a hand on her shoulder, his golden eyes steady. "We'll hold the line. You focus on the tome. Trust yourself." She nodded, her grip tightening on the book. The pack formed a protective circle around her as they advanced toward the writhing mass. The closer they got, the louder the whispers became, a cacophony of voices that scratched at the edges of Ava's mind. Then the darkness moved. A tendril lashed out, striking one of the wolves and sending them flying into a tree. The pack roared in unison, charging forward as the shadows surged to meet them. Xander's fist collided with the tendrils, his strikes glowing faintly with a golden light that seemed to push the darkness back. Luca darted through the chaos, his blade flashing as he cut through the writhing shadows. Ava pressed forward, her heart pounding as the tome's glyphs flared to life. The whispers turned into a chant, the words spilling from her lips unbidden. The light from the book grew brighter, cutting through the gloom like a blade. "Ava, now!" Xander shouted, his voice strained as he fought off another tendril. She reached the edge of the mass, her hands trembling as she held the tome aloft. The shadows recoiled from its light, but the darkness surged forward, its tendrils coiling around her legs and pulling her down. She cried out, the tome slipping from her grasp as the whispers grew deafening. Then she heard him. Seth's voice, calm and steady, cut through the chaos. "You're stronger than this, Ava. Trust the light. Trust yourself." Her vision cleared, the fear melting away as a fierce determination took its place. She grabbed the tome, its light surging with renewed strength. The glyphs burned brighter than ever, their patterns locking into place as she chanted the final words of the incantation. The light erupted from the tome, consuming the darkness in a wave of silver brilliance. The tendrils disintegrated, the whispers fading into silence. The writhing mass at the center of the clearing let out a final, piercing scream before collapsing into nothingness. When the light faded, the clearing was silent. The corruption was gone, the air clear and still. Ava fell to her knees, the tome slipping from her hands. Xander was at her side in an instant, his arm steadying her. "It's over," he said, his voice filled with relief. Ava shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, it's just beginning. There will always be shadows, but for now, we've bought the realm a little more time." Xander nodded, his golden eyes meeting hers. "And we'll be ready for whatever comes next." The wolves gathered around them, their howls rising into the night. It was a sound of triumph, of unity, of hope, and for the first time, Ava believed they could face whatever the future held, together. Chapter 22. Darkness Sealed. The first rays of sunlight broke through the treetops, casting the forest in a warm golden light. The battle was over, but its echoes lingered in the quiet hum of the clearing. Ava stood at the edge, her silver eyes fixed on the horizon. The tome in her hands was quiet now, its glyphs dark and still, as though it, too, had found a moment of peace. Behind her, the wolves moved with a somber purpose. Some tended to the wounded, their hands steady but their eyes heavy with grief. Others gathered what remained of their weapons, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief. Elder Morella stood near the center of the clearing, her silver-streaked hair catching the light as she spoke in low tones to Xander and Luca. Ava turned as they approached, Xander's golden eyes meeting hers. He looked weary, but the fierce determination that defined him had not dimmed. Luca followed, his usual humor absent, but replaced with a quiet respect. "It's done," Xander said, his voice steady. "The darkness has been sealed. The packs are safe." Ava nodded, her hands tightening around the tome. "For now," she said. "But we both know this isn't the end. The darkness may rise again, and when it does, we have to be ready." Xander placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze unwavering. "We will be. Because of you." Luca stepped forward, his smirk faint but genuine. "Not bad for a librarian," he said, "though I'd still like to know where you learned to wield ancient artifacts like that." Ava managed a small smile. "I had good teachers," she said, her gaze flicking to Morella and Xander, "and a lot of help." Later, as the wolves began to disperse, Ava found herself standing beside Elder Morella. The older woman's sharp eyes studied her for a moment before she spoke. "You did well," Morella said. "Better than many of us expected." "I had no choice," Ava replied, her voice quiet. "The prophecy demanded it." Morella's expression softened. "Perhaps. But you went beyond what the prophecy required. You united the packs, gave them hope when they had none. That is something no prophecy can dictate. Ava looked down at the tome, its weight familiar now, almost comforting. "What happens to this?" she asked. "To me?" Mirella placed a hand on Ava's arm, her grip firm but kind. "The realm will need its guardian for years to come. The tome is yours now, as is the legacy of the Silver Wolf. But you won't be alone in this. The packs will follow you, and Xander will stand by your side. You've earned their loyalty." Ava nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then I'll be ready. Whatever comes next, I'll face it." As the sun climbed higher, Ava walked to the edge of the clearing, Xander falling into step beside her. The forest felt different now, lighter somehow, as though the weight of the darkness had lifted. But Ava knew better than to think it was gone forever. "Do you think Seth would be proud?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Xander was silent for a moment before he replied, "I think he knew this was the only way, and I think he trusted you to see it through. That's all the pride he would need." Ava nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She wiped it away, her silver eyes fixed on the path ahead. The wolves had begun to rebuild, their unity a testament to what they had overcome. And though the fight was far from over, Ava felt a spark of hope. Together they would face whatever came next. To